Merry meet, everyone. So, tonight we are talking about the tools that witches use and why tools are absolutely not necessary in your practice. So, we will explore why intention and foundation are really the keys to using tools and finding ones that work for you. We'll be talking about how everyday objects can be used as tools and how they become more sacred through use. We'll also be talking about how you can practice magic with or without any tools at all. So, whether your altar is loaded full of tools or all of your tools are inside your head, there's going to be something for everyone in tonight's episode. So, merry meet. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin. And tonight I'm here talking about the Witch's Toolbox. This episode is about tools, intention, and everyday magic. So, welcome to those who are joining us live. Say hi in the chat. Let us know you are here. As always, we'll have a Q&A at the end, so you can leave questions and comments. I'll be watching the chat as we go. And also make sure that you leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the episode, and that will help us get this out to the feed of more people. So we're going to dive in. There's a lot to talk about tonight. And so we're going to be talking primarily about different kinds of tools and also about, like I said, why tools are not necessary. So you may find yourself on one end or the other of the spectrum. You may find yourself somewhere in between. But like I said, there's going to be something hopefully that you will learn throughout this episode. We're also going to be talking about how you can repurpose tools, how you can use everyday objects that either you find in nature or thrift stores or in other stores. And we're also going to be talking about how, in some ways, about how you can actually make your own as well. So hopefully the microphone is working. If anybody could let me know, that would be great. And I'm just going to dive in. And the first thing that we are going to talk about is kind of what's the foundation of what we're talking about tonight. So, as I mentioned, tools are never going to be required for you to be a witch. And so sometimes people, especially when you're coming newer to the practice, you kind of think you need all these things. I certainly can speak for myself. When I came to the practice over 30 years ago, I felt like I needed a bunch of stuff to be a witch, and I pored over books and learned about all the tools and bought a bunch of them. And I'm here to absolutely tell you that you do not need to do that. I like to normalize different paths, right? So in some people's paths, they like to have a lot of tools, and other people's paths, they don't like to have any. And all paths are correct, and the path that is correct for you is the one that makes you feel good, right? So some witches love tools, and if you love tools, there's nothing stopping you from getting as many as you want. Some people use very few, and there's nothing wrong with that either. And so what we want to normalize here essentially is the no right or wrong way to practice witchcraft, at least when it comes to tools. Some people work entirely internally, and I'll be talking more about that as well. I know for myself, as as I've increased with my practice, I have noticed that more and more of my magic, especially my solitary magic, has become more internal. So I just want to reassure you, especially if you are new to witchcraft, that there is no experience required to be able to enjoy an episode like this or to be able to enjoy your tools. There is no purchase required either, and there is no right way to practice. So what is a tool? What is a tool? So let's kind of start with that. So a tool is anything that can help you focus your intention and direct your energy. So it might do both, it might do one or the other, but that is the definition of a tool, at least from a perspective of a witch or a magical practitioner. So tools, they do not create the power themselves. I do think that, when I was very young and coming to the craft, which was in my late teens, I don't know that I fully understood that. I did think that like it was necessary for me to have these things, and these things made me a witch. So I hope if you are newer to the path and you are feeling that way or thinking those things, I'm hoping to kind of dispel those myths right now. The tools themselves, well, they help us to direct and focus the energy and charge things, and they can amplify energy. They themselves are not what make us witches or magical practitioners, right? They amplify the energy, they focus energy, and they anchor it, which can be very important for newcomers, especially. And for those of us who've been on the path for a while, having that extra aid, right, can be so helpful. That amplification of energies also, a couple of things to talk about regarding that. So, for example, let's talk about the candle, and I'll be showing some different tools as we go today. But this is just one form of candle I grabbed, and I've got a few others to show you. So the candle itself is connected to the element of fire. So whenever we use a candle, we will amplify the energy of fire around us or in our space or connected to our intention. But that doesn't mean that we would necessarily need to light a candle in order to be working with the element of fire, because again, all of this can be done internally. But the any kinds of tools that are connected to a specific element, for example, will amplify the energy of that element. Now, tools also can work on our self confidence and our self belief. And so, this is also why they can be very helpful for newcomers, because when we're first starting out, and even as many of you know, even if you've been on the practice on this path for decades, you still may grapple with issues of self doubt and self confidence, right? Issues. And so, the tools can actually help to amplify our self confidence, our self belief. Those things will make our magic more productive. So, for example, like I said earlier, when I was first starting out on this path, I used tools exclusively. I would not even have imagined when I was in my late teens and very early 20s that I could do all of this in my mind. But now, as I have progressed, over 3 decades on this path and have taught, hundreds of people across those 30 years, I have I've realized that most of the magic I do in my solitary practice, a good portion of it is internally. A lot of it is in my mind, and so we'll be talking a little bit more about that near the end, about how you can do that, right? But I will tell you, when I was first starting out, I would have found that inconceivable that I could have done that. I'm here today, though, to normalize it and to tell you that any one of these paths is accessible to anybody at any stage of their journey. All right, so let us first just kind of an overview, kind of this, what are the spectrum of tools? So we're going to talk about kind of the mind, the body, and then the objects that we use. But before I do that, I want to go to the chat and say hi to some of those who I'm seeing here. So Mary Meet to Andrea and Jen, thanks for letting me know the mic is good. And Cersei is here, and Pamela and Taliesin, Mary Meet, everybody. And Sam is here, Mary Meet. So Andrea said she loves her tools because they make her happy and they bring in positive energy because of it. And so that's going to be a really important, like we're going to learn as we go through the episode. One of the things that's probably the most crucial thing for you to remember is how you feel. So if the tools make you feel happy, they're going to just, by default, they're going to be increasing your abilities, right? Because they are lifting your mood. They are lifting your confidence and your self-belief, and they're just making you happy. So they're going to make your magic more productive. On the other hand, if there was somebody whose tools were stressing them out, and we're going to talk about that later, then I would say something totally different to them about it. If the tools are stressing you out, then they aren't lifting up your energy, right? So Sam said, I imagine that that old widow in the woods, the village wise woman used whatever she had handy or whatever she could devise. She would have been an expert at improvisation. And we are going to be talking about that as well. So the old wise witch in the woods, she did not have she did not have Amazon, right? Where she could just call up and get a chalice, or type or send an email and get a chalice. She would improvise with what she needed. And so we'll be talking about how even as modern witches, we can still do that. Even with all the other tools accessible around us, we can still improvise with what we can find at home. And sometimes there can be even more power in that. Taliesin said, he said he agrees. He said, I know I don't need them, but I love them, and their correspondences. Yeah, and so that can be really important for people too. I mean, I love them too, just as much as the next person. But I'm hoping tonight to show, to the kind of the different ends of the spectrum, and probably most of us are going to find ourselves somewhere in between, where we're using them sometimes and then other times we're not. But for some of you, it may be eye-opening that to learn that you don't need a single one, and all of it can be done in your mind. Um, Okay, so let's dive in, but keep the comments coming. I'll have some questions for you as we go as well. And so the spectrum of tools, right? So we have tools of the mind. So the tools of the mind are kind of the ones I was talking about when I'm talking about like when I was much younger and I couldn't have conceived of doing all this in the mind. But our mind allows us to focus energy. It allows us to create intention, and it also allows us to create visualization. So, for example, there is this thing that we will often do at the beginning of our Sabbath rituals, and when our Sabbath rituals are in person, sometimes we will actually have all of the tools and everything laid out for people to go and do this little ceremony that they do before the ritual. But when we're online, we have to help people, have those things at home. And so we do what's called the consecration of the elements. And if you've ever been to any of our Sabbats, then you have done this with us before. It's a really nice little ceremony that you can do, and it allows you to basically consecrate and cleanse yourself through the four earthly elements. And so the little ceremony asks you to put a bowl of water, a bowl of salt in front of you, to represent water and then earth, respectively, and then a candle to represent fire. And then usually for air, we put incense or maybe a sage bundle or perhaps a feather or something connected to air, right? So we tell people, gather those things if you want, but if you don't have any of those things or don't have time to get them or can't do it, so, I mean, we encourage you to visualize yourself doing it. So during this little ceremony, I'll instruct people to, take some of the salt and put it between your hands and rub it between your hands and say this little thing. And so I encourage those who don't have the tools, the physical tools in front of them, to just do that mentally in their minds. And to me, it's the same thing, right? As whether they had it or not. So it all depends on whether we have them in front of us, they're accessible to us, or whether we even want to do it at all. Because sometimes, and I will tell you, I love rubbing the salt between my hands and rubbing the water and lighting the candle and doing it all with the tools. But let's say I'm out on a subway, right? I'm riding the subway, and maybe I want to do the consecration of the elements and I want to do some kind of cleansing or protecting of myself with the elements. I could literally sit there, close my eyes on the subway, and I could do all that in my mind. So that is the power of the different parts of the path. And as a witch, there can be a time to do one versus the other, and so I think it's important to know about all of them, right? So that's kind of the mind, and we'll talk more about that. Now, as far as the body as a tool, your body is absolutely a tool. You have your breath, you have your voice, and you have the ability to move. Now, when it comes to talking about this, a lot of this is about how we're raising energy. So you're using your body as a tool to raise energy. So you might be chanting, you might be saying specific words, you might have some kind of an evocation that you're doing, or maybe there's a chant that goes along with a spell or a ritual working. You can raise energy through movement. You can do clapping, right? You can use your body to clap, to make sounds. I love, because I'm a Kundalini teacher, I love using Kundalini exercises to raise energy. So one of my favorite ones is the Sufi grind, or stir the pot, or stir the cauldron for us witches, where you just make, from a seated position, make these circles with your hips. And this begins to raise energy from the lower chakras, drawing it up into the higher energy centers, which is where we need it to be in order for us to focus that energy and send it out with our intentions. So a lot we can also do with our body as a tool. And then there is what most people think about when we talk about tools, which are the objects, right? So these are the objects, the cards, the symbols. I've got some show and tell tonight, so I'll be showing you some of my stuff, and I'd love to hear from you in the chat too. Like, what are your favorite tools? And then there's also symbols and cards and different things like that that could also be the objects. So, and then the other thing that we sometimes forget about is the environment as a tool. So, the environment includes the space around you, the timing, and the atmosphere. And so, for example, there was back in the very beginning of the pandemic, I came across this trail that was, about 10 miles from my house, and I would go there and I'd explore it. And over exploring it through many weeks at a time, I discovered little parts of it, like little offsets or outlets off of the trail. And I remember in particular, there was this one I once found, and I kind of wandered off of it, and there's this clearing and these trees, and it's quite perfectly made for ritual. You could just you walked up to it, you could be like, you could totally be here with your coven or just solitary and do some kind of a working. And so then from then on, I began doing workings in this space. And as I did more and more workings in this space, I began to feel the energy change and transform. And it was changing and transforming. Basically the energy of the environment was changing and transforming because I was there, and I was there so much, and I was doing all these magical workings there at this place. So the atmosphere of the space can change, and it can grow, and it will kind of vibe with you. That was certainly something that I felt. It was kind of like vibing with my energy. And I felt what I also noticed, and this is kind of more of a conversation for like creating sacred space and like a future episode. But one of the things I also noticed is that, so typically, like in an outdoor space, you don't always have to cleanse it necessarily, but I usually do. I put some kind of like protection, just mostly because if I'm at a trail or something like that, I don't want people like coming up to me. So I put some kind of boundaries to sort of create a blockage so that the people kind of go the other way while I'm doing what I'm doing. But what I noticed is that the more I worked in the space, the more the space became a tool of mine, and it understood my energy, and I didn't need to cleanse it as much or protect it as much when I would get there. It was just like I would get there and already I could sense that the energy was vibing with me. So that's just an example of how environment, atmosphere can also be used as a tool, right? So I think when it comes to all of this, the most important tool in your witchcraft is you and your awareness. And so the more aware you are of why you use tools, how you use them, which ones you like better, it's going to be very empowering to your magic and amplify it. So let me know in the chat when you think about tools, when we just talk about a witch's tool, when you just hear those words, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? When you hear a witch's tools, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Let us know in the chat, whether you are live or you're with us a little bit later. Um, so let's see. Pamela said she does this almost every morning. She said it makes her feel witchy before she starts her practice. Oh, I don't know. Are you referring to that consecration of the elements? I love that too. I love that little ceremony because it's standalone, but also is so good. Like it's like kind of a prelude to the day or a prelude to the ritual. Sam said, I charge my cane with my own personal power all the time, which is awesome. And I've heard of many other people doing that as well. It's gotten quite powerful over the years. I did the same with my altar tools, but those are gone now. But yes, but you have your cane and you can continue to charge it, especially too if there's something that is with you all the time, like a cane or something like that. And we'll talk a little bit later about you don't need to go buy fancy amulets. You can use your own jewelry and you can charge those as tools. So like things that you wear all the time, rings or necklaces, bracelets that you wear all the time, those can be charged as tools as well. Um, and so people are saying crystals. So Angie said crystals. Taliesin said cauldron. Pamela said yes, the consecration of the elements ceremony. Andrea said herbs, and we'll also be talking about those as well, though not a lot. This isn't a class on herbalism, but we'll be talking about herbs as tools. Candles, cauldron, Pamela said. And Sam said Harry Potter's wand. Yeah, right. Yeah, and the things that as much as it's a fictional book and a fictional movie, there is some reality, around a witch's relationship to their wand or to their Athame or something like that. And to me, like a cane, a staff, like something that somebody has to carry. It's got that same energy to it, right? It becomes an extension of you in a way that you can create boundaries or you can direct your energy and your intention. All right, so let's go on now, and we're gonna and keep it coming in the chat. But let's talk about the mind as your primary tool. So I've already talked a little bit about this, but we are going to be doing a separate episode very soon. I don't know if it's next week or maybe after Imulk, but we're going to be doing a separate episode on the witch's mind as well. So I will get into some of the things I talk about here. Here I'll talk about them kind of briefly. I'll get into them in more detail in a future episode. But intention is the most important part of your magic. Now, I'm going to dispel a couple of myths because I do see social media posts going around telling you that intention isn't everything. And I'm going to kind of explain what that means when people say it's not everything. So usually when someone tells you that, some people will say intention is everything. And then some people will get really mad and they'll say intention isn't everything. And then I'll see people like arguing. So I can see both sides of this perspective, and I'm explaining to you what I think it means, and then you can kind of take it without however you take it. But I think when people say intention is the most important thing or it is everything, it is true that your intentions they set the internal barometer and the energy that you're calling in and creating. And so for me as a teacher, I've always said to people, like, for example, the color red is often associated with the fire element, right? And red, when people think about the color red, they think about passion, they think about fire, they think about, maybe they would think about creativity, the spark of creativity, drive, right? They might think of aggression. So there might also be like some negative connotations to the color, like all things. But let's say that there's a person who thinks that red, when they look at the color red, it feels like really calming, and they are actually kind of thinking it feels more like what some of us might think is like blue, right, or something connected to water. But they feel that red is very calming, and that's the color that they want to use for calm. So who's to say they're wrong, right? So while it is true that colors vibrate with certain energies, if we look at different paths across different cultures, so for example, red in the chakra system is connected to your root chakra and therefore the element of earth. So it's more like the red clay of the ground, not the red of the fire. Well, is one system better than the other? No, absolutely not. It's really, when it comes down to this, it's really about your intention. What do you feel the color red represents? And then that is what it should represent for you. If instead you try to kind of put yourself into like a box and make your intentions feel the way that everybody else's intentions feel, or something you've read or been told, but it goes against how you're feeling inside, there's going to end up being this disconnect, right, between the intention and you. And whenever you have a disconnect between the intention and you, well, what do you think is going to happen? Your magic is not going to be as productive as you would hope it would be. So that's where I say, intention, when it comes to like things, what do they represent to you? What do they make you feel? And really go with that first. On the other hand, there are specific traditions that may have their own sets of rules. And so a lot of times when we're talking about, I would recommend using a blue candle, but you use the one that you want, I'm talking about my eclectic kind of brand of witchcraft here. But there will be some paths, like, for example, ceremonial magicians who are practicing high magic. There are very specific instructions that tell you that you must say words very specifically or draw things a very specific way, or something different will happen than you intend. And so if it's the path like that, then I would listen to the people who have traveled on that path for a while. That is not really what I am talking about when I say that you choose, you should feel what things, what kind of associations you feel certain things have. There's also, like within hoodoo, there's like very specific ingredients or different ways that you do spells. And if you don't do them the specific way, they could have unintended consequences. At least that's what the literature and the teachers teach. So on that hand, you can see where people are coming from when they say, well, intention isn't everything. It does depend on the path and, the specific things you are looking at. So I hope I make sense with that. From my own perspective, I really think that intention, the intentions that you set are going to be the primary key to what moves you forward in your path. It's certainly the brand of witchcraft that I teach, and I've always assured my students as well. So kind of on a little segue there, but coming back to the magical mind. So we talked about intention. Now, visualization can be a big part of working with intention. Or sorry, it could be working with the mind as a tool. So this can also, though, so sometimes when we see like visualization or try to visualize, let's go back to that example of the consecration of the element ceremony. And I said, well, if somebody doesn't have the tools in front of them, then I would tell them, well, visualize yourself doing all of this. Sometimes visualization can be difficult. And in fact, we know that there is a group of people, a percentage of the population, which is probably higher than we imagine, that does have difficulty visualizing. So when you hear visualize that, if you are not a good visualizer, you may disconnect from that. So what I'm here to tell you is that visualization, while that's what people are going to say a lot of the time, visualization isn't the only way to do this magic in your mind. So if you are not good at visualization, you can think about feelings and sensing and emotions. So, for example, we can like visualize ourselves doing something, or we can sense ourselves feeling something, or we can conjure up an emotion, right? So rather than seeing yourself do the workings of the spell, let's say the spell is supposed to direct, I don't know what this is coming to me, but anger, right? So you could bring anger, you could kind of evoke the energy of anger and use that to channel that out into the universe as your intention. But there also, you could do the same thing with more peaceful emotions like calm, right? And focus, love, right? Harmony, protection. So what does it feel like to be protected? And you conjure that up, and then that becomes how you use your mind as a tool. So some examples of using the mind as a tool is casting your circle mentally, right? So you could see, sense, feel, or imagine yourself casting the circle. So I have actually done rituals online. So a lot of the times when I do the online rituals, I physically stand up and I cast the circle in this space. And I certainly do that when I'm out and I'm leading larger groups of people in my own practice. Sometimes I just close my eyes and visualize the energy being cast around me, or casting that energy around me. And you can do that as well. Calling in energies without using the objects. So we talked about that. So if you don't have an Athame, still calling in the energy of the Athame, or imagining yourself using the Athame. You can set your intention silently. This was like a big thing for me. You don't have to say it out loud, and you don't have to do anything. So sometimes when I'm doing my private rituals and my solitary work, I just speak to the gods in my mind, and I call them in my mind, and I thank them in my mind, and I ask, for what I need in my mind. And so a lot of times we can set intentions silently, and that is okay too. You can work your magic while you're lying in bed. You can work your magic while you're walking, or while you are resting, or like I said earlier, on the subway. You could totally work your magic any place. Now, are you going to whip out all of your tools on the subway? Probably not, but you certainly could, but probably not. But knowing that your tool is just as your mind is a tool that is just as effective as any of the others, you can absolutely do any of this all in your mind, lying in your bed, resting, walking, anywhere that you are. You never need an altar, you never need candles or tools, or anything like that. And in fact, you don't even need privacy, as I was explaining on the subway. You're probably not going to have much privacy there. But if you feel you need privacy, you can always go into a bathroom, right? And close yourself off, or go into a smaller room and close yourself off. So I think that all of this, to me, it's really important to know, especially for those of us who have very busy lives, those who have limited space or limited funds, that so much can be done without any of this stuff. There also might be people who are healing from religious trauma, and sometimes even pagan rituals can look a little Catholic at times, right? Oh, or a little Christian. And so maybe people are healing from that and they're kind of freaked out about the ceremony of everything. So I think it can be important to normalize all the different approaches to the path and knowing that you don't need any of this stuff unless you want it. So if you can imagine it, you can produce that kind of magic. To me, that is probably the most important takeaway from this entire episode. If you can imagine it, you can produce that kind of magic. So we're going to talk now about traditional tools, which is what most of people think when they hear the word tool. But before I do that, I'm going to go into the chat and and just see whatever if anybody has anything that they are saying. So so Pamela said cauldron, Harry Potter's wand. Sam said that's the heart, not the mind, telling you how you feel about that, this or that. The heart is the master of us all. And so I think that, energetically, many people do consider like the heart the center. I think that sometimes in different traditions, people may not necessarily say that, but I definitely agree. I think that there also one thing that we should probably differentiate is the mind versus the brain. And two, when I am talking about the mind that expands out, it's a little bit different than the mind of just I'm thinking, right? I'm just thinking normal, mundane, everyday thoughts. The magical mind is much bigger. It is very much connected to the heart. I've always said the heart itself, the energetic heart space, is like the ocean. It's vast like the ocean. It has no edges or boundaries. It's you know we can visualize it as stretching out from here to eternity. And so I do think when we're talking about the magical mind, it connects to that energetic heart. So Angie said she struggles with visualization. And we do have another episode on visualization that you might enjoy where I give some tips on what to do if you are one of the people who kind of struggles with visualization. I'll try to find that and drop that in the chat later. I can't remember off the top of my head what the episode is, but you might find that helpful. But again, it also kind of normalizes that visualization it doesn't make you less of a witch, and it is difficult for more people than we probably realize. But I do give some tips in there about how you could increase your visualization skills, and then also how to kind of hone in on the particular clair sense that is your strongest, and then use that in place of visualization. So using clairsentience in feeling if clairsentience is your main is your main clair. So, all right, so let us go on to traditional tools and what they represent. So, candles. Okay, so just actually before I go into this section, I just want to let you know that because of the space and the time of this episode, we are not going to talk about every single tool that there is. And I will say that if you are interested, if you're really interested in tools and really interested in learning extensively about witchcraft, we do have a course called Demystifying Witchcraft, and we have a whole entire module that's just about tools where I go into way more detail than I'm going to tonight. But I am going to talk about most of the main ones. So I'm going to start with candles. So candles, they can have many different purposes. They can help us focus. They can help us with intention. I usually think of candles. I do a lot of candle magic. So different witches will like different tools, and candles are one of my favorite. I think that they are very accessible. I like prayer candles. I can get these for $1 and 25 cents, as we were mentioning at one of our Shadow Seekers meetings recently. They're no longer $1 at the Dollar Tree. They're $1.25, but still good price on them. We have prayer candles like this that I love because if they tip over, they go out, right? This is why you'll see people use them in vigils outside. We also have, like smaller little candles. We can get even smaller still. I like little chime candles because they're designed to burn out usually within about an hour. But we can also have votives. We can have pillar candles, any candle you can think of, shaped candles. You can buy candles, you can make candles, you can search for candles of certain materials like beeswax or soy versus the traditional paraffin. So candles help us with focus, they help us with intention, and because of their connection to the element of fire, they're also connected to the energy of transformation, and like I said, the element of fire. So if you want to represent the element of fire, a candle, if you are using tools, will generally be your easiest thing to use. You can use candles for your quarters. So that's what we do in our own coven. We have a set of candles. We actually have several sets of candles, some that stay here, some that travel when we travel to do rituals in other places. And those candles go out at our quarters. You can have candles we also have a candle in the center to represent spirit. You can have candles that represent the god and the goddess. You can have the candles like when I'm talking about these are usually going to be candles that I'm using in my spell work. So lots of different ways that we can use candles, right? Then we have, I'm going to kind of start by saying, like, what would we do to represent the four elements? So a candle on your altar will help you represent the four elements or visualizing that, right? Then we have the Athame and the wand, which in our course Demystifying Witchcraft, I go into great detail between the two. Here, I'm kind of grouping them together because they have similarities and they have differences, which I will explain, but they both can direct energy and they both can secure and create boundaries. So the Athame itself, people will tell you different things. By tradition, is oftentimes has a black handle and it has a silver blade, and it is usually sharp, but it's usually not used to cut things in the material plane. So this is just usually. So like if you do it, where there would be an exception here, especially, is a kitchen witch is going to tell you screw all that. Like of course I cut things with my Athame, right? My traditional Athame, I got this after searching for many years. I found this in New Orleans at a little shop. I knew it was mine. It was about $100 back then. I had to have it, and I got it. It's got a little horse here on the end, and Epona is one of my patron goddesses, and especially at that time, she was my main goddess. This was the perfect Athame for me. But prior to that, I used a steak knife that I stole from my mom's kitchen, and I tied ribbons around it to make it look pretty, and that was my Athame for years. And then at some point, I kind of transitioned over to this is a letter opener. So a letter opener can be used as an Athame, and I just thought this one was cool because it has a little dragon and a stone on the top. And so your Athame, the Athame itself, depending on the tradition you're talking to or you're talking about, in most traditions, the Athame is connected to the element of air, but sometimes it can be connected to the element of fire. Those would be the two that you would most see, but most of the time you're going to see the element of air. Whereas the wand is often connected to the element of fire, or vice versa. If the tradition says that the Athame is connected to the fire, then the wand is often connected to air. Personally, in our own tradition, we say the Athame is connected to air and the wand is connected to fire. You can buy really elaborate wands or you can make them, and we'll talk later about DIY. But here is an example of a wand that I made and a stone a stick that I found, and I kind of I sanded it down and I put some runes and different symbols on it. I wrapped some ribbon around it for a handle. My little crystal has fallen off, but this was very easy to make, and it was very inexpensive, right? Because I found most of the materials. So you don't have to go and spend a lot on these things. Now, sometimes people feel like, and this will just be like my kind of how I personally use these two differently. So I use the Athame to cast my circle. I also use the Athame to do different things. So like, for example, if I'm going to evoke um, or invoke or I'm going to release certain things, I might do different symbols, draw different symbols in the air with my Athame. Like I said, I cast my circle with it, and sometimes I will use it. Like I might use it in the uh, oh gosh, the sacred marriage, right, where we bring the athame down into the chalice at Beltane, but it can be done at any time of the wheel in order to represent the god and the goddess. And so the athame also is often connected to the sacred masculine and the god. It can represent it because of its phallic shape, can represent the god, whereas what we're about to talk about is the chalice represents the womb of the goddess. So again, Athame wand. So for me in my own practice, that's kind of what I do with an Athame. Whereas a wand, I might use it more for directing energy in spell work. And so sometimes people will say it's like an extension of their hand and their arm, and they use it to direct energy. But there are some people who will only use the wand, and they'll do all the things I just talked about, including everything I talked about with the Athame. They'll use the wand to do that. And or there are some who will never use the one, and instead they're always using the Athame, and then some people will have both. So remember, again, it's your practice. You don't need all these things, especially if you were newer here. You definitely don't need all these things, but I wanted to be able to show several of them to you. Now the chalice also will often get grouped in with the cauldron. So this is a chalice. This is actually not the original one, but let me actually take a step back here. So this is the original chalice. So this chalice here, it was in, has been in my mom's possession for a very long time until I asked for it because I think she was getting rid of some things. And I remember as a little kid she had this, and this was before I came to the path when I was in my late teens. So I remember as a little kid just being in awe of this. For anybody who recognizes this, this is actually an Avon. These were pieces that were made by Avon back in like the 70s and 80s. And she had this, and she had, I think this is the only piece of it. I came since later to find that there's other pieces of this collection. There's bigger ones as well as smaller ones. But I was enamored with this thing. And so when she would give it to me, I asked her for it. And this, I was enamored by a chalice since I was a little kid, right? So go figure, I ended up becoming a witch. Years later, not a whole lot later, but when I was living in Boston, and specifically in Allston, I found this at a thrift store for $1, and this became my chalice. And it has been my chalice for years until one day Beth dropped it and it broke. And then she found me a replacement. So this isn't the original one from Allston, but we were able to find a replacement. I believe this was a vase from FTD Florists. So we were going to talk about like kind of repurposing and thrift store finds, but that's where my chalices have come from, and I never have once bought one. Now the chalice is an item of receptivity, of holding intention. It is related to the womb of the goddess. It is also connected to the element of water and to the divine feminine. Now you can also use a cauldron as well. What the cauldron can kind of do that the chalice doesn't usually do is the cauldron can allow you to burn things in it as well. A lot of times people don't burn in the chalice, but the chalice can allow you to put things in it that you then drink. For example, maybe you do the ceremony of cakes and ale during your ritual and you could use your chalice. So that is the chalice. I did want to mention once I was reading, I love the author Raven Grimassi, but once we were reading a book, and it was a newer one of his books. It wasn't the oldest ones like Wicca, Magick, and Mysteries, which were ones that I read when I was like a teenager. This was like a newer one that had come out in the 2000s and later. And there's a part where he's talking about how your chalice must be made of pure silver. And we were reading this book in a book circle, and everybody was like, what the heck? So that is one opinion, that your chalice must be made of pure silver. But I venture to say, I've known many witches, many witches over the years, and they do not all have cauldrons made or chalices made of pure silver. So that is one opinion, and maybe that's a specific opinion of his tradition. But I always tell people to be a little hesitant whenever you hear like absolutes like that, because I'm here to say you do not have to have a cauldron of pure silver. And I do love Raven Grimassi. It was just that one sentence that it kind of bothered me a little bit. Um, because we're talking about elements, so that is connected to water. I also wanted to mention the Peyton, which is a tool that is less commonly known. Oh, my other one, I didn't take it off the altar, so I'm gonna have to show you my less good one. So this is, it's a little harder to see the pentacle in it, but a Peyton is often like, it's often made of wood, though it can sometimes be made of clay or stone, the clay ones, or even wax. And the wax ones could be thrown in a fire to kind of like protect witches of old from having people find the remnants of their spells. But what a Peyton is it's usually something round, often made of wood, that has a pentacle drawn into it, and it can be placed on an altar, and it can be used sort of as a charging plate. So we put it in the center, and then you kind of put stuff on top of it that you want to charge on the center, on the center of the altar. But the other thing that the Peyton does is it's a way to represent earth on your altar. Now there are other ways to represent earth. You can use crystals and various things like that. But this is what I have always used to represent earth, is a Peyton. And I have a really nice one that also has spaces where you could put candles, little tiny chime candles in it as well. But like I said, it's good for charging objects and using it to represent the earth element. And then of course we have crystals. So crystals can always be used to also connect to the earth element. They have resonant energies, which are different depending on which crystal you're using. So using a hematite versus a carnelian versus an amethyst is going to be very different energy. At the end of the day, though, crystals, because they came from the earth, are connected to the earth element, and then may also be connected to other elements based on their properties. For example, like amethyst is, or I'm wearing lapis. So lapis through some, so you could say it's connected to water because it's blue, but we could also say it's connected to the element of spirit because it is connected to the blue of lapis is connected to the throat chakra, which is connected to akasha in Sanskrit, which is the element of spirit. So a lot of different connections to your stones, and you can layer on different kind of energies by using different stones in your specific workings. Your crystals, like I said, they have resonant energy and they have the ability to amplify intention. So if we're looking for like love, we could amplify it through a lot of different correspondences. So we could have a pink or a red candle. We could have rose quartz. We could have specific herbs that are connected to love, like jasmine or rose or clary sage or something like that. And then we can stack those energies, and then you are going to amplify the energy of your intention. I also wanted to mention tarot cards and oracle cards as a tool. So those can be used for reflection and for intuition and for dialogue. Sometimes people don't even realize you can use the cards as to dialogue with deities or with your higher self or with your guides. But they can also be used before a spell begins. You can use the cards to ask what would happen if I do the spell versus what would happen if I don't do the spell. And then that can give you insight into whether you should do the spell or not. You can also use your cards afterwards to ask, what's the kind of the trajectory of this energy now that the spell has been done. And then we also have the altar as a tool. The altar is kind of the platform where you practice, never necessary, but can be important for some witches. I use these little lac tables from IKEA. At the time I bought them, they were like $10. They're a little bit more today probably, but great for seated rituals like that. The top of your bookcase can be used as an altar, or you can actually have specific tables for altars. Altars can be permanent, meaning that they're always in place. Maybe you change the things that are on top of them, but the table itself always stays there. Or altars like this one, it's always there, even though the things on it may change. But you can also have temporary altars that you throw up for a specific ritual and then you take down when that ritual is over, or altars that might be put up for a holiday or Sabbath and then taken down when that is over. So now remember, tools are never necessary, but they can help you with, they can help your subconscious engage, especially if you're somebody who has self-doubt. Tools may be helpful to you. But it is important to remember that your tools are your helpers. The magic isn't coming from them. The magic is coming from you, and they are only amplifying the energy, right? You yourself are the source of that power. I mean, the universe is the source of the power, and then you are directing it through your own will and through your own self. A tool is only meaningful if it means something to you. So if everybody else is gung-ho on the Athame and you're like, I don't get it, I don't understand why people like it, well, it's not going to be very meaningful to you to be using it then, right? So let us know in the chat, what is your favorite tool that you regularly use? We'd love to hear from you. And like I mentioned earlier too, we have a much more extensive discussion on tools in our course, Demystifying Witchcraft, which I will talk about a little at the end if that is something that interests you. Okay, I'm going back to the chat, and then we're going to dive in and talk about tools that you can make at home. So we'll talk a little DIY here for a bit. So I see like Pamela said she loves candles. Yeah, for me, it's probably if somebody said to me, "What's your favorite tool?" I would probably say my Athame, just because the story of getting my Athame and searching years and years for it. And so, by the way, too, like I searched years, and I knew someday I would find it, and then that like. It was probably in 2010 when we went to New Orleans on that trip is when I actually found it. But I had been practicing witchcraft for, oh gosh, 12, 13, some 14 years before that, using my letter opener, right? So I say this story just to kind of normalize, like, if you haven't found it, it's okay. The right one will come to you eventually. Sam said, got me some flameless candles ordered today, usable in the nursing home. I'm so glad you did that too, because um, I think, sometimes people don't even think that those could be used, but they absolutely can be used. And you can still do candle gazing with flameless candles. We were at like a candlelight vigil. This was back in June when all of the chaos was happening in LA, and we'd gone to this candlelight vigil for like a civil rights leader, and they had recommended, because of our fears of fire and our PTSD around the fire that had happened earlier that year, they told everybody to just bring the flameless candles. So I think that the LED candles are an awesome tool for people who can't use the flame candles, and I know a lot of people who can't, or have concerns about fire, or concerns about like leaving them going, things like that. Um, and then Sam said, and I didn't mention the Boline. Sam said, cut things with your Boline and save the Athame for spiritual work. And I absolutely, that is actually what I do too. And it's what we kind of teach in our tradition. But I do know kitchen witches who will say, like, screw it, they cut with the Athame. But I agree with you. I have the Boline to cut, especially herbs. And then I use my Athame for my spiritual work, cutting only things on the spiritual plane, at least for me. Taliesin said he uses both the wand and the Athame. Wand mainly to call in the elements. And then Sam said the glass chalice, glass from sea sand is best, and it's probably not from sea sand because it's, like I said, from Avon and FTD Florist. But I agree. Glass that we can find from the sea sand would be awesome. And then I didn't talk about bells, but I do have a little bell here. I didn't go into it in great detail, but bells are also nice to use to differentiate portions of the ritual, one part from another part, and calling in energies and things like that. So let us know in the chat. Anybody else? What is your favorite tool that you like to use regularly? Okay, so how much time do I have? So I wanted to get into tools that you can make at home. And then I'm going to talk about tools that you can find. So You can absolutely make your tools at home. So, for example, a handmade wand can be made from a fallen branch or twig. So, like I told my story of making this one from, and in fact, in this bag, I've got all kinds of like sticks that I've gathered. And part of why I was doing this too is I probably got a whole bunch more down in here too. When I would find a cool one, I would just grab it and I would try to make note of what kind of a tree it came from so I knew the wood. And then every once in a while for like in-person stuff, we do wand making. And then I have like a whole cache of these sticks that I can let people pick from. But if you are not already picking sticks up when you go on a walk, think about doing that, especially if you want to make a wand. You can also make a wand out of a kitchen spoon. That's a really good idea, especially for a kitchen witch, but anybody could do that. Like I said, with the Athame, I used a steak knife that I took from my mom's kitchen. You can use a letter opener like I have. Sigils, sigils are always magic, always a good tool to use, and they can be hand drawn and made yourself, especially when they are made the traditional way, which is where you write out the intention and you cross out vowels and repeated letters, as opposed to like some of those generators that people are using. I don't, I feel like there's just a lot more that goes into a sigil when you make it yourself than if you just type the intention in and then just press this button and this thing makes it for you. And I personally think they look better when you make them yourself and then you have that extra energy of you putting it in. And I will tell you, I made a sigil. Sigil magic and candle magic are my two go-tos. And I made a sigil on Friday night after a fight with my insurance company who wanted to lowball me on a claim on my totaled car. And so I knew that my car was worth $12,000. And I knew that they were going to try to lowball me because I just knew they were. And so I wrote down, pay me at least $12,000. And I wrote the $12,000 out in words so I could make my real sigil, my traditional sigil. I made my sigil. I started to kind of panic and freak out during the weekend. And I remind myself, you made the sigil, and I was going to getting messages from my guides that everything would be okay. I got my payout, and it was $12,483. So sigils really work. I do recommend making them yourself, though, and not just using the generators, but it's totally up to you. I think they can still work with the generators. Spell jars from recycled containers. You don't have to go out and buy fancy stuff for the spell jar. You can absolutely save baby food container, bottles, jars, right? Spaghetti sauce jars. You can get all kinds of different sizes. This is how you could store your herbs, but you can also use them to make your spell jars. You can make candle holders out of found objects. One little makeshift thing I like to do is, especially like with a chime, is I will get a bowl and I will fill it with salt, and then you just like take a lighter and soften the wax on the bottom of the candle, and then just stick it in the salt inside that bowl, and it will be a makeshift candle holder for the duration of this candle. Your handmade Athame, I already talked about that. Kitchen knife and letter opener. Talismans from Sculpey clay. You don't have to go buy fancy talismans. We've totally made them out of Sculpey clay, and then you bake them. Why are handmade objects so powerful? Well, I think that there is an energy of creation that goes into it because you put the time into making it, that time and that intention. Like think about my sigil, or not my sigil, my sigil, my pay me at least $12,000. I mean, I put all that time into it, and then I carved it into a candle. And then I bought another candle later that was in a larger container like this so I could burn it over the weekend since I knew I wouldn't talk to anybody till Monday. And then I drew that sigil all over this. When I went to the insurance company, I drew the sigil on a piece of paper and I stuck it in my bra. But you could also draw it on your body. I think that, there's personal symbolism in the things that we make ourselves. And again, there's no external authority that is required to any of this. It's like, what do you feel like making? What is the best expression of your magic? Buying a tool does not make it powerful. You and your relationship with it does. So really think about that. So then that leads me into found and repurposed everyday objects. So I would love to in the chat let me know, what are there any tools that you've made? What are your favorite tools you've made? Like me and the I love my sigil I just made because it got me my $12,483, so I can buy a new car. Thank God. Thank the goddess. But or at least it'll go a little ways in this crazy car market of today. Or do you have any found and repurposed uh, car tools that you use? So let's talk about that. Found and repurposed everyday objects as tools. So I love looking at thrift stores for tools. So remember my story of the FTD um, florist Chalice. There are so many things you can find, so many little finds you can find in thrift stores. Sometimes the objects may have been used by other witches who intended them to be magically used, but a lot of times they're not. You can find a lot of candles, candle holders there. You can find we found like the little offering bowls. I don't know if you can see them back on the on the altar, but we have the little offering bowls and offering plates. We get a lot of those at the thrift stores. I just think there's so much fun in going to them and browsing through, and then finding that special thing that you're taking home with you. Nature walks, right, where you might find the sticks or stones or different things, or maybe you'll get lucky enough to find a hag stone. That's a stone that has a hole through it that you can gaze through for meditation. If you're on the beach, seashells and different things like that to represent water, or bringing home sand. Like just a soil right on a walk could be used to represent the element of earth in place of salt. There is just so much that you can find on nature walks. Even just regular shops, you never know what you'll find in them. I personally love the Dollar Tree because we have one just over here near my house that I can walk to. And I like to get my candles there, and I always look for little candle holders. But a lot of things that we can do and find at places like the Dollar Tree. We're always just looking for objects that call to you. So sometimes you have no idea why this thing is calling to you, but it is. Like, was it not this year, but last year, we were at this store that's near us, which is where we buy a lot of our sage sticks and our incense and oils and different things. And they had this huge Shiva lingam. And for those who don't know, a Shiva lingam is a type of stone that can be used to balance your chakras. And they're usually, when you find them, they're like that big. But Beth found this one, it was like this big. And she was like, I don't know. It was a good deal. They had it on, it was half price, and it was her birthday. There was something about it. And she was like, it's just calling to me. And so she got it. So sometimes you're just out and about and the objects just call to you. So, listen to your intuition about that. Uh, so other examples too, sometimes people, you know what? Your chalice does not have to look like this. You could use a coffee mug for your chalice, or just a regular old glass or cup. You can use a key as a symbol of the thresholds. It can be an old key. A lot of us have old keys hanging around, lying around, right? You can use that. You can use a notebook for your grimoire. It doesn't have to be some fancy leather-bound thing that you buy at the store. You can use the jewelry that you already have to make talismans by sending your energy of intention into those. I already mentioned stones and shells and feathers, as long as they are ethically sourced and you found them, right? So those can be great tools to use. So sacred objects are made sacred through their use by you, through the intention that you put into them, and through the time that you put into them. So let us know too. I've already kind of asked this, but what is your favorite found object? Like me and my chalice here, or your favorite found tool, and let us know in the chat. And you can put that in, and then I'll read those. But I do want to kind of close here with the shadow side of tools. So this is just to kind of normalize some things, or just sort of put you at ease, put your mind at ease if you're worried. Never feel like you are behind and not witchy enough because you don't have all the tools. Remember, you need absolutely nothing but your mind. You never feel that you have to buy something for it to be legitimate. fight consumerism. It is one of my favorite things to do. So find things or buy them used or resale, or find them at Dollar Tree or things like that. Can be still buying it, but a little bit less than some of the other places. Try to buy in more local places than just on Amazon, so you can support local stores. So if you do want to buy things, see if you can find them locally. I do know that some of you live in places where there are not any witchy stores around you. So Amazon is good to have because of that. But if you are able to support local stores, that is another way to fight consumerism, right? Um, Let's see here. Also, the other thing is try to avoid comparing yourself and the stuff you have to other people. Or, for example, like sometimes people will share their altars, and then maybe yours, you don't think yours looks as good, and then you start to feel bad about yourself. Just remember, all of this is in you. It's all inside of you, and you have the power to create any magic. If you can imagine it, if you can feel it in your body, you have the power to produce that, and you don't need any of this. Also, mistaking aesthetics for practice and expertise and things like that. So like it is, I love making things look good too. But just because they look good doesn't mean that they work better than somebody else's that doesn't maybe look quite as aesthetically pleasing. So anyway, when it comes down to the tools, it's like I said, they're not necessary, but they can help you out. By increasing your self-confidence, making you feel, um, uh, having more self-belief and kind of getting rid of your self-doubts. They can help to compound and expand energies, especially if we stack correspondences, and using multiple different things that have the same correspondences will amplify that energy. So when it really comes down to when you're trying to pick a tool, is kind of thinking about what tools will help you focus your energy. Will this tool be meaningful to you, or does it feel obligatory? Like we never want to have a tool just because we think we have to. And then also kind of considering when you're going to buy a new tool, what do I already have that I could use? Do I really need this, right? So I encourage people to build their toolkit slowly, especially if you're brand new. Unless you've got like a lot of money that you can and will put down, it's totally okay to build really slow. That's how I did it in the beginning, and just repurposing things in my house because I didn't have any money, and I was kind of secretive about my witchcraft when I was still living at my mom's house. Letting tools come to you intentionally and naturally. So remember the story of my Athame. I didn't stress out. I knew someday I would find it, and then one day, 15 some years after I started, 12 or 13 years after I started practicing, I wander into that store and find it there. So your tools will come to you, put that energy out, and they will come to you, and then just allow your practice to evolve. So I hope that helps. I'm going to go down into the chat now. I didn't really see any. I looked quickly, but I didn't see any questions that were left for me. But if anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. It can be anything related to witchcraft, shadow work, or energy work. It doesn't have to specifically be about tools, but I'm also happy to answer any questions about tools. So put those in the chat, and let us know. Taliesin said knitting needles make good wands. That is great. I didn't even think of that one. That's awesome. And then he also said jars I can repurpose into spell jars or bottles for moon water. That's another thing you could use for your repurposed jars as well. Moon water or herbs. So a lot of possibilities. So I hope that no matter where you are in your journey, I hope that this has helped you in some way. Let's just talk about, I wait to see if there's anything more in the chat. Let's talk about what's coming up. And I knew I had a card with that. So we have a public ritual, a public online ritual that's coming up in a couple of weeks. It's going to be on the 2nd of February. This is our Imulk ritual, and it is our beloved elemental vows ritual. So there will be more information coming out as we get closer, but it's coming sooner than we think. We're like already halfway through January almost. So this ritual is beautiful. We always work with the goddess Breed, as is very customary at Imulk, and we help people kind of you'll get to contemplate sort of your connection to the different elements, and then we will help you construct a set of elemental vows that you can then use to guide your practice for the next cycle or the next year or whatever feels good to you. So it's a very beloved ritual. We do it every year. It changes a little bit year to year, but if you are in our coven, of course, you are already coming to that. If you are in our Shadow Seekers membership, also your ticket is part of the membership. But if you are not part of either of those groups, you can get a ticket. You can join us through a small donation. So just look for more information about that coming soon. And also, I've mentioned a couple of times my course Demystifying Witchcraft. That is also coming soon. It's set at this point probably to launch in February to the public. But if anybody is hearing this and they'd rather get their hands on it sooner than later, just reach out to me and I can send you the information. But we are going to do a big launch for it. And it is my signature course on witchcraft. It's basically everything I teach people who initiate into my in-person coven. And now we also have an online coven. And if you take that course, it will lead to an invitation to join that online coven if you are interested. So more information to come on that. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere here. That helps us get this out to the feed of more people. Make sure, if not already done so, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Body Mind Witchcraft. Our goal this year is to get to 10,000 subscribers and to also get the channel monetized. So every person who subscribes helps us, and everybody who goes in and watches some of our videos also helps us, because one of the things we need is 4,000 video view hours. So I'm going to put a little link in the chat as well. And this is a link to our mailing list. So if you're not already on our mailing list, go ahead and sign up for that. And that way you will be alerted when these replays are available on YouTube. We put all of these live episodes on YouTube later. It will alert you when those are available. It'll send you some different witchy tips and things throughout. Every week you get one email with that. And it also lets you know when things like those rituals and classes are coming up. So check it out. And on top of it, you will get sent a copy of The Witch's Guide to Shadow Work. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. As always, it is always so wonderful to spend the Tuesday night with you. And I hope that you have a great time. Even if you're watching back in replay, if you've got any questions, reach out to me. I always love to hear from you. And until next time. Blessed be.